Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about presenting and specifically about making cue cards to help guide and inform and structure your presentation. As part of our discussion today, we are going to be looking at a number of different things here, but we're going to be using as the basis of our discussion a particular assignment that is coming from HISO 250, and we're going to be also looking at the score system for live presentation. Now, if you are not familiar with the score system, don't worry. It's a very straightforward, very easy to understand system, but it helps us prioritize what we do and don't do in the presentation and overall make for more focused, edifying, and enjoyable experience for your audience. So with that, let's look at that score system. So the score system is basically an acronym for these habits. Keep it simple, make your messages clear, make it original, keep it related to your audience, and make sure it is enjoyable for them. Now, related, we could replace that with the word relevant and say, this is something that is of interest to you. And what those things will vary on your audience. And so I would say a great point to start before this is ask, who is your audience and what do they want? Now, I am going to be introducing a talk tomorrow for a university's global health program. And so there will be students who are enrolled in a global health concentration. And as I am preparing to introduce the speakers for this, I am asking the questions, what do the students who are attending want to know? What sorts of things are relevant? And so there are materials that you might decide in another context, like talking about someone's educational journey or career milestones, that might not be as much of interest to a audience that's further on in their careers. But for students who are wondering, what are the major milestones that I will be hitting, that I will be working through, those things, that model of what someone else did, could be very much of interest. All right, now keep it simple. We've all probably been at a presentation where someone goes off on lots of tangents and they explain things in so much detail that people lose track of the original focus. And so keep it simple. You can also say, keep it digestible. Don't dump too much information on people at once. And so knowing when is enough and when it is too much are helpful things to work out in your practicing. Keep the messages clear, knowing what the beginning and end points of a talk are, knowing what the key things to pay attention to are, what the takeaways are, really helpful, especially if you label those verbally or visually. Original. I've been to some classes where people were reading out of Wikipedia articles for their presentation, and it was never terribly interesting. Among other things, we could have all read that much faster. In some cases, we had read those articles. And whether it's in a music encyclopedia, whether it's a historical reference or something else, one of the reasons it wasn't so engaging to us is that we weren't the target audience of that article. So this is bringing us back to keep it related to the audience or keep it relevant and make sure it's enjoyable for them. If you find something that's really cool and interesting, tell them why it is interesting, because those little details make all the difference in someone saying, okay, well, this is just a presentation that I need to get through to, oh, I'm really interested in this and how to process that. Now, if you're joining us now, don't worry, we have been talking through the score system for live presentation, which is just this mnemonic: keep it simple, make your messages clear, make it original, keep it related or relevant to your audience, and make sure it is enjoyable for them. And so our next step, our second learning objective here, is we're going to look at this assignment for HISO 250 and going to talk about some of the things that it suggests might be helpful when applying the score system for this presentation. So this is coming from the Introduction to American Ethnic and Women's Studies course, and looking specifically at the week 2 assignment 1, Slavery in America lecture recording. So let's take a look at the instructions for that assignment. Now, and take a look at exactly what those instructions are and the ability to effectively communicate what they learned. Okay, so not just having read something, but tell us what is key to what the prompt is. Now, we have some instructions that are more of a preamble. One of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. This week, you will create a short lecture on slavery in America from the early 17th century through the Civil War. Keep in mind, this is a class on women's and ethnic studies, so include details related to each topic within the presentation. Now, if we go back to look at the score system here, that's the keep related to your audience. Know who that invitation to give a lecture to the group, the Daughters of the American Revolution. Normally, if I was giving a presentation on music for them, for a group, I wouldn't be going into a lot of detail about who was whose son, granddaughter, cousin, etc. But that's a group where one of the founding interests is, oh, how their families trace back to the time of the American Revolution. And so that is exactly the kind of thing where they'd want to know that, because I've given a lecture to a group like this and someone came up and said, oh, that was my great, 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 great grandmother. I loved hearing those details. And because they had the details to understand how it was relevant to them, and that helped them enjoy it. So back to our assignment details here. So you have the choice of making a video recording and with or without PowerPoint. Now, we'll talk about how to use PowerPoint and how to record things. But if you're not using PowerPoint, then you can record yourself using the camera on your phone or your computer or tablet. And you can even do voice only. So really, this gives you the chance to pick, what would you like to do here? Because if you have an interest in podcast, maybe you want to try out, oh, how do I make an engaging podcast? How do I apply those things? You might be saying, well, I expect that for jobs, I'm going to have to make some presentations and I might need to make a demo presentation as part of a job application. And so I want to practice that. Maybe you want to practice your public speaking, including your mannerisms, your gestures, and so you want the video recording. It's your choice. It is possible to have things that hit all three. One of my favorite podcasters in the area of health sciences, they were a community college lecturer for many years, so they had really good demeanor, and also they would make things interesting in their voice when they were saying things. So I think you'd get the most if you watch them on video. But if you're just listening to a podcast version, or if you're just watching their slides go by with the narration, it still works really well. But you get to choose which thing or things you're practicing for this. Now, we do have a list here of what to include. And I would say this is a checklist for things that the person grading this is probably going to be looking to see, are all of these present? And we'll come back to that. We have our guidelines here, 7 to 10 minutes. We have information from all the 4 sources that are listed down here, and provide it in your own words. So if you're going to make any quotations, clearly identify that as a quotation and make it brief, concise, and clearly relevant. Now, if we're talking about the score system here, that's part of the make it original. But you might find a tidbit that's really helpful for the enjoyable part. If so, keep that. Just make sure it's a minor part rather than the major part of what you're doing. Okay, now we should orally cite your sources. And so this is an important thing. People often forget that in the moment. And I would strongly recommend that you keep good notes as you're preparing for this so that you don't accidentally miss something like that. Our next step is going to be just looking at the rubric here. And you see that it has more or less a list of what's required here. And I'd like to point out that it includes speaker introduction, topic introduction, and conclusion at the top. That's a good thing to be reminded of because here, that is the last bullet there. And we want to make sure that you get all the points and don't lose this when you're thinking, oh, shoot, I'm almost out of time. So make sure you have those at the beginning and then just the tag the conclusion at the end. Now, if we check this list against that, let's zoom out, we can see that we have this here is up here. Then we have the different treatment here. That is this part here. So, and if we continue through, we find that everything here is basically in the rubric here. So because this follows the most logical order, and indeed is what your instructor is supposed to be using as they review your presentation and assign a grade, I would, in this instance, follow the order in the rubric because this one part, these first two things are most logically placed at the beginning. All right, that's the introduction to it. We're going to talk about the score principle. And I want to let you know that although we're modeling how to implement this, we're not going to be working with the details of the actual assignment because that would be doing homework for someone. And I'd rather hear what you have as your take on this and what your original thoughts are, because I know what mine are already. But a good way to start is to just copy and paste this. And we are going to head over to PowerPoint. And we're going to start a blank presentation here. And I'll share my screen there for you to see. All right, so we have a blank PowerPoint slide here that you should now be seeing. First thing we're going to put on our name. And you're welcome to follow along in PowerPoint or Google Slides or your presentation software of choice if you would like, and build your own presentation. Now, the assignment instructions say, this is a Slavery in America lecture recording. I could start with just that. Slavery in America. All right, that's pretty broad. Probably want to be more specific, but it does what we need. Now, there are certainly more exciting titles you could get, especially if you have a hook or an angle, like maybe you're working with primary sources for something. But whatever it is, have a title that functions first, and you can always spend more time making it exciting later. Now, those of you who've been to a lot of my presentations know that I wrote my doctoral dissertation about the island of Mauritius in the southern Indian Ocean. It is a beautiful tropical island. If you think of, say, what Kauai in Hawaii looks like, a similar level of beauty. So we're going to talk about slavery in Mauritius instead. Mauritius is beautiful tropical island destination. Got about 1.4, 1.5 million people here. And already I can liven things up. I am going to go ahead and go over to my web browser and search for a picture of Mauritius. Now you can see, even if we're just going for geography, that gives you some sense of what this place is like. It's beautiful, it's tropical, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And whether you're looking at the geography, or in this case, the hotel in front of it, or this startling thing, it grabs people's attention. Even if they've never been there, I show them pictures like this and they say, oh, that looks lovely. And so they're interested and engaged in the presentation already in a way that would not necessarily be true with a blank slide. So I'm going to go ahead, and I happen to really like this photo. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to put it in my background here. Now, the cue card part that we're going to be talking about applies whether or not you have visuals or not. But visuals are a great place to start. I pasted that in here. And if I right-click or control-click on a Mac, I can use this send to back or send backwards so that it is behind the text. And I'm going to go ahead and send it all the way to the back so that slavery in Mauritius pops up. Now, that black on blue is kind of hard to read. So we see here, there are different designs that are proposed for how to make that more visible. We're going to go ahead and go with this one here. White on a slightly grayed out background. That's certainly fine. Looks great. And again, gets people interested. All right, so next thing we want to do is make sure we get all the different points here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the instructions here. And let me just make sure that you can see what I've been doing here. Let's run through that again. So I have this blanked slide, and I paste in this image. The image is covering things up. I right-click or control-click on a Mac, and I can select send to backward or send to back. So all the other elements, the text is in front of it. Now that black is kind of hard to read here, but we have open our designer pane here. And open that, and it will look and present some different ideas for how to present that. And which you pick doesn't matter here, but I think the image is really nice, so I want that image to be pretty big. So I'm going to go with, let's say, this one here. All right, so we need a new slide, all right? And to make sure that we get full credit, now I'm going to start copy and pasting in things from the instructions here. And I might even change this just for our purposes here to totally blank slide, paste that in. It's pasting a table. So that's not looking so great. It's a little hard to view. So what I can instead do is go back to the instructions, whereas in bullet form, and paste those instead. Now, we can start deleting things immediately. We don't need this title at the top for our outline purposes. So we'll immediately go ahead and expand this and say, oh yes, short personal introduction goes up here, the introduction of the topic, and then conclusion. So this gives us an idea of all the things we're going to talk about in order. And if you really know this topic well, you could just decorate this outline and go from it. In my case, we are talking about Mauritius. So I'm going to replace all these references to North America with Mauritius. Now, Northern, Southern, there are some parallels there. Okay, so we've adapted this to the things that I want to talk about here in my presentation. And one of the things that would be really helpful to do is just look at this list and see, okay, how much time is it going to take? And use that as a planning point for my next slides here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some blank slides and see, okay, personal introduction by the speaker, introduction to the topic. All right, that's not something I need a whole lot of space to do. I can introduce myself pretty well. I can introduce the topic, but having a cue card for myself saying, hey, do that first is very helpful. And here we have the speaker notes section. So if you were doing a presentation with, say, a picture of you, you could have the notes saying to, hey, talk about that down here. All right, let's add a picture of me. And you could include some key points here if you wanted for a visual presentation. But the point is that we have a big note to introduce yourself and then the topic. All right, so other things here we have, and let's make this text a little bit larger yet. So we have checked off this one to do. Discussion of the origin of slavery in Mauritius. Great, I should make myself a cue card about that. Next one, definitions of indentured servitude and slavery. Absolutely. First slave rebellion. Different treatment. And as we start adding more and more slides here, we get a sense of, okay, given how we have, roughly 7 to 10 minutes here, that this is something that we're not going to be spending a whole lot of time on each one, but we sure want to make sure we get through all of these things because we want full credit. Now, this one here is probably going to be, well, something I learned about this is X. It's important to me because of these reasons. And so that's probably going to be a shorter one. And knowing that something is going to be a shorter slide is helpful because some of these will take more time, but you could even make a note here saying, don't embellish. And that helps you stay on task and know that you are going to be doing just the things that you've listed here. All right, we're almost done with our list here. We have the conclusion. Now, a big question is whether you show people the full outline of what you're going to be doing. And the answer is yes, it is usually helpful. In this case, there's a lot on here. You can just not list that you're giving the introduction and not giving the conclusion because that's kind of assumed. Most presentations have that. A good presentation should absolutely have those. And so that helps us cut the list a little bit. It also helps defer questions because if people know you're going to be talking about that thing soon, then they can hold their peace and then you can get everything done in an oral presentation and then take the questions after. All right, so let's say we were talking about this. The big thing that will probably throw people off is making sure that they cite their sources, how they know for each thing. And so here, let's say that we're talking about this one here. And I have a book that I want to cite about Mauritius and the different dynamics there. And so I want to cite a book called Creating the Creole Island by Megan Vaughn. And so I can leave a note here to cite, hey, that's where the information is coming from. All right, the rest of the stuff, because of what we are describing here, we have a basic outline just from translating the assignment. You can give more details to yourself Whether or not you're showing them to other people, you have them on these slides as your cue cards for yourself. But for this next part, we are going to go into a special mode here. So we are going to move into presenter view, and we are going to record some voiceovers. Now, when we go into the presenter view, you see that any notes that you have are showing up in this field, and you can type more notes here. And so I have a note to myself to just say, hey, this is an outline of the talk, and don't say anything more about it. Now, as I'm going about this, it's a good idea to just talk through this and see how you're doing. And in fact, we have this timer up here that you can reset that will just count the seconds and minutes here. So you could work your way through all of this and see how long it took you. And oh, it's taking me more time than I thought. I should go ahead and trim that. And at some point, you're going to say, okay, I'm ready to start recording things for voiceover. And so for that, we're going to go ahead and look in this view. We can go ahead and say, all right, how do I find how to record? Just search for record, and it shows me, oh, insert record audio. That works. Insert audio, record audio. Now, it tells me here I need to give PowerPoint access to my microphone. Great. I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll be right back. And I'm going to have to restart PowerPoint, so that'll be up again in just a moment. Okay, so reopening PowerPoint now. Now have access to things I did not have before. And so you should not be sharing my screen. And again, I'm going to go up to the menu and I'm going to select Insert Audio. And record audio. And so I get this little button here to start recording. Great. Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and I'm going to be talking to you about slavery in Mauritius. Now, I am a specialist in the musical and military history of Mauritius. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the island and was able to spend a lovely year living there. This topic is something that continues to have many resonances in Mauritian history. What to do with the ongoing, almost 200 years after abolition, the ongoing repercussions of those demographic changes and what happened after in terms of indenture. This is something that still comes up in the Mauritian parliament more than 50 years after independence. Now, that tells me that was 42 seconds, and I can insert it here. And so then someone who was, if you're presenting it or listening to the recording and that you hear of it later, it'll be played. Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and you can see whether that's something you like or something that you want to change and re-record. Maybe you need it to be faster, maybe you need it to be a little longer. And you'll see that the designer actually also suggests some alternate ways of presenting it. I kind of like these boxes here. Now, I will go ahead and I will take out the short personal introduction, and I'll take out the conclusion part because, again, those I think are pretty self-explanatory. And plus, I've got the notes here to give those on the second slide. But for the outline, I like how that looks. And you can play around with the designer and see what else it suggests. Okay. So looking at things, I've got this here, I've got this here. I can record my own introduction. Again, I'm going to go to, I could use the menu at the top, insert, or I could use this insert here and look for, audio. Here's another way to access it, record audio. And that shows you this tab here. And once again, I can hit this red button to start recording. Now, I happen to have recorded this already on this slide. So maybe I did that and say, oh, I want this on the next one. So I can select it. I'm going to hit Command X on my Mac, be Control X on a PC. And I can go to this next slide and hit Command V or Control V on a PC and paste it here. So now I go back to this and say, okay, I'm supposed to be introducing this as the outline. All right, going to hit record. You can see here a brief outline of our presentation. I'll be hitting all these points in this order, and please hold questions till the end. Remember to hit insert or we'll lose that. And once it's inserted, a good convention is to just drag it to the lower right-hand corner here so that people who are getting the PowerPoint file can just click on that to play. We can also export this as a video, for example. But if you're circulating the PowerPoint deck, they'd see that to click on it. All right. So I'm going to record something here, and then we're going to talk about the principles in action again. So slavery began in Mauritius almost as early as human colonization. Mauritius was the home of the dodo bird, and when a Portuguese fleet ran into Mauritius after a storm in 1598, they very quickly found that there were no humans there, but it was a beautiful island with stable supply of fresh water, birds and other animals that they hunted. And so it's not surprising that in 25 years, a Dutch expedition came to colonize the island, and they tried to make it a self-supporting colony that required no imports of food. Well, that didn't work so well. The people they sent there did not like trying to grow their own crops there. So they went to Madagascar and they bought 50 slaves, came back, and immediately half the slaves ran away. And they said, oh, and instead of saying that was a terrible idea, let's not do it again, they said, oh, let's go get some more slaves and let's buy some chains this time. And that is the unfortunate origin of slavery in Mauritius, setting off a history that lasted, about 208 years of slavery on the island. Now, it's important to distinguish between two different phenomenon, indentured servitude and slavery. And these functionally might be very similar in day-to-day life, but the basic legal distinction, no matter what country you're in, is that indentured servitude has an endpoint, and slavery will not in of itself stop. And in the case of the American colonies, there were people who were brought there specifically as slaves. There were people who were brought there as indentured servitude. Many of those who were there in indentured servitude were not doing that of their own volition. They might have been captured in a war. They might have been convicts being sent there to serve out their sentence. They might have been sent there just because they were poor and homeless. And this is what the local authorities were doing to, quote unquote, get rid of the problem. Now, in terms of Mauritius, they did not start with indentured servitude. There were indentured servants who came to financial return on sending people halfway around the world there. They usually put people in contracts of, again, this is something where there was a defined endpoint. And although people would sometimes try and escape to flee or abandon their indenture, on an island, there's only so far you can go. Now, if you're paying attention in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see I've been talking for almost 3 minutes about that. That's something that if I was giving this presentation, I would have to go back and say, all right, hold on. I went on to a whole lot of extra detail here. I've got a lot of other things to practice. So you might say that you have to re-record that. One of the beauties of putting this together and recording slide by slide is it's easy to see when you've gone overboard, when you've used too much time. All right, so I promised you that we'd look back at our starting principles here. So let's take a look at our other things. So remember, we were talking about the score system. So that's keep it simple, make your messages clear. Well, I was not keeping it simple there. I was talking about lots of stuff because I'm excited about it. But we need to make sure that it's clear and focused to our audience. They don't need to know what it was like in other countries, just here in Mauritius. So I'd go back and delete a lot of those details there. And I might give myself some bullet points and a reminder saying, don't say too much about this. Okay, so we have the keep it relatable or related to your audience, make sure it is enjoyable. So one of the things we might do is go ahead and add more visuals. You saw me do that earlier. Another thing is to pick your anecdotes very tightly. Well, I can tell you that when the French East India Company colonized Mauritius, the Dutch East Company had left and all the escaped slaves were still there. And so within a month of the French East India Company coming in and bringing their own slaves, they were attacked by a bunch of escaped slaves who then freed some of theirs. And, again, they drew probably not the best lesson from it and said, oh, well, we need to go get more slaves rather than, there's a big problem with this system. So choose your anecdotes, but make sure it's enjoyable, make sure it's relevant, and for your audience, probably not giving too many details. All right. So let's finish by just reviewing a couple things here. So looking at this assignment, we want to make sure that you hit all these details here, but we have a hard limit of 10 minutes long. We have a number of sources that need to be identified. We need to cite them verbally and to, generally speaking, to be paraphrasing. If you are using a quote because it is so great, so delicious, make sure you identify it very clearly. Because if you're not acknowledging the source, if your whole slide is, or much of it is reading directly from the sources without introducing it, that would be plagiarism, and plagiarism is not good. Okay, so let's finish with a final recap of the score system. Keep it simple, make your message clear, keep things original, relate things to your audience, and make sure it's enjoyable to them. It's better to have a 7-minute presentation that is really focused, that is keeping your audience with you, than to spend an extra 3 minutes giving more information, but everyone's looking at their watch, wondering when this is going to end and thinking about anything else. So short but sweet, and often that is saving details that you know that you could give, that you could probably talk for hours about, but saving that so if people are asking a question afterwards, you can give them that, you can draw on that, but start it with just what's required. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, to go to my.acu.edu and select the Online Writing Center group to find out how to schedule an appointment, to visit us online, and perhaps check out one of the other webinars on our page. So thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.